So I'm Anand. I'm one of the founders here at Armorblox. I run product and marketing here. I'm really happy to welcome the next panel on here. So I have Elvis Chan, Crane Hassold, and Rick Hayes. So if you could join me up here. So this panel, and I love the way DJ introduced it. So instead of calling myself the moderator, I'm going to say I'm the prompt engineer. So if you have any pressing questions that you had in your mind that you'd want us to talk about, I'd love to get started with that. Anything anybody has in mind that you need an answer for? If not, we'll leave some time at the end for your questions. But let's get started. Maybe let's start with a round of what you do from the left with Crane.
Yep. So my name's Crane Hassold. I've been in the private sector for about 8 years now, building threat intel teams at a number of different companies. Part of that I was with the FBI for 11 years. Most of the time I spent there in the behavioral analysis units. Did 6 years of the sort of classic serial killer, violent crime, behavioral analysis and profiling. And then myself and two other guys created the FBI's Cyber Behavioral Analysis Center, which takes all those concepts that have been used for decades in the violent crime profiling world and applied them to cyber threats and cyber threat actors to look at them from a different perspective.
Wow. It's pretty impressive. My name is Rick Hayes. I'm with CISA. We're the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. We're so secure we have security twice in our name. So I've been with them about almost 2 years now. We're only this many. We're a very young organization. Part of DHS, one of the 22 agencies underneath DHS. I'm the Cybersecurity Coordinator and Advisor to the state of Nevada. So there's one of each of us, at least in each state. And we just kind of help the states and all critical infrastructure understand what their role is in cybersecurity, what risks they're facing, and help them to identify and then mitigate those down to an acceptable level, which is sometimes an exercise in futility, as you can imagine. Prior to that, I was at Pentagon, working with the Air Force Special Access Programs in Fort Meade before that. And then 35 years Air Force doing cybersecurity there at Headquarters Air National Guard. And glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Elvis Chan. I'm the Assistant Special Agent in Charge for FBI San Francisco, so the local field office here. So as the ASAC, that's kind of an unfortunate acronym, but that's what we call us. I manage 9 squads, 6 of which are cyber investigative squads, covering down on all of the cyber threats, by geography as well as cyber crime. I also am responsible for our regional computer forensics lab, our technical operations, which includes, cell phone tracking, body recorders, that sort of stuff, and then private sector engagement, which is why I'm here right now.
Thank you all. I have a few different themes that we could go down, and it could take a few hours if we went through all of them. But just to set the stage, one theme definitely I wanted us to touch upon nation-state actors and what we are facing as a nation as one of the topics for us to talk about, given all of your backgrounds. The second thing I wanted to talk about was partnership between vendors like Armorblox and the agencies. The third thing I want to talk about was, of course, ChatGPT, and if you're starting to hear that and you're getting questions around those. And the last one was specifically around the trends that you're seeing in the market in terms of the kind of attacks, not necessarily only focused on email, but what kind of things are you hearing about the complaints that are coming across, and how are you raising awareness around them? So maybe in this sequence, let's start with the trends first. Given the FBI report, do you want to start with that, the IC3 report?
Yeah, so unfortunately, IC3 is the Internet Crime Complaint Center. So it's the letter I, the letter C, the number 3.gov. So we do an annual report, and every year the numbers get worse. So I think of last year, still the number one financial loss leader in the United States was business email compromise, which is, why we're talking with you, over $2.8 billion of reported losses. So we estimate that only 20% of victims actually report to law enforcement. Bless you. So if you multiply that number by 5, probably a more accurate assessment of how much loss was, over $12 billion, probably a financial loss in the United States alone just from BEC.
And Crane, you've been tracking this for a long time. Can you speak to the trends of how you've seen this?
Yeah, business email compromise. So social engineering is something that I've been researching for a number of years now. And it's really shocking just how it just keeps getting worse year over year. As someone who studies BEC, the IC3 report that comes out every year is something I get really excited about, probably too excited. But because it's really the only big report that comes out that shows you the financial impact of BEC attacks, right? No one has the entire picture, but I think IC3 probably has the best picture. And so, I think what's been pretty clear over the past really 10 years is that, a lot of people think of cyber attacks as these really technically sophisticated things, when in reality, BEC is really nothing more than just words in an email pretending to be someone else. And it's clear that has become very lucrative for threat actors, especially actors in places like West Africa and Nigeria, where social engineering has been entrenched in a lot of what the criminal underground does there for literally decades at this point. The same people that were running, Nigerian print scams in the mid-90s are the same people whose kids are now running BEC attacks today. So, social engineering and the manipulation of human behavior is something that is becoming more and more pervasive. A lot of what, which we saw in the last IC3 report were things like pig butchering, right? All the cryptocurrency investment scams that have become so popular. That's also pretty much pure social engineering, just coming out of a different part of the world, right? So a lot of the pig butchering scams are coming out of some places like Southeast Asia, but it's all the same concepts. It's not technical. It's just exploiting behavior and sort of what's entrenched in us as human beings that's really difficult to override.
Rick, how is this fitting into CISA's agenda of educating the public about BEC and other kinds of, has your agenda also been tracking the rise of incidents of these attacks?
It has been, and it's just we have 4 priorities areas where we're looking at K through 12, water and wastewater, healthcare, and election security, right? So as we're looking at those are really our targets, but really we're focusing on all 16 sectors of critical infrastructure. And as we look at that, just trying to educate people, not just about how to recognize, but having a plan for incident response should things continue down that path, and hopefully they don't. It's just a tough sell. The biggest area that I see isn't recognizing that there's a problem. It's getting that problem communicated between those at the lower level that are working in the trenches and senior leadership. There's not a communication flow that happens between them, and vice versa. Those senior leaders aren't understanding what kind of questions should I be asking about what our risk posture is, how susceptible we are to these types of attacks.
One follow-up question to you about that. So if I work at a large company and I want CISA to come and talk to my company about attacks like this and educate is that part of what CISA does?
It very much so. Of course, all of our services are free. Did I mention our services are free? They're free. They're free, right? I was just talking with my buddy over here before, and I was like, maybe it would help if we said, well, there's a $5 charge, like a cover to get into a bar, right? They're free. So everybody's got that. And so all you have to do if you want someone to come and talk to you, just look on our website, CISA.gov. And we're starting to really try to push our marketing out so that folks know our services are there so we can support them and educate them and help them develop programs. A lot of times I go and do assessments, free assessments, by the way, go and do these assessments with them. And, they might take anywhere from 4 to 8 hours, and then we uncover whatever information there is. It's protected critical infrastructure information. And we brief them about it. Some folks think, well, that's it. Is it a taillight warranty? It's done when you drive away and I can no longer see your taillights? No, we'll keep working with you to help you come up with a plan, develop a plan, test it, tabletops, right? Right down to the point where we can say, okay, great, here's some areas for you to take to your senior leadership and talk with your risk managers, with legal, with your CFO and your senior directors so that it's an effort of unity across with those multiple lines of effort.
And Elvis, similarly, so I work at a large company. I'm in the finance team. We just got hacked and I lost money. Is there a way for me to confidentially report that to the FBI so my company doesn't suffer brand reputation loss? How do I follow up? What do I do?
So absolutely, and you just brought it up. So it's ic3.gov. You can actually fill out a form. So say you were the victim of a business email compromise. It's a form on ic3.gov. It's called the Financial Fraud Kill Chain. And our success rate last year, if you submit the form within 48 hours of having wired your money, we had a 74% clawback rate last year, right? That's within the first 48 hours. It's kind of like a kidnapping where after 48 hours, it gets really grisly and bad. I mean, at least it's, not a kid, it's like your money, but our success rate goes way down after 48 hours. That's why I'm really foot stomping. As soon as you figure out that money went out the door, fill out that form, and then you're going to send it. We have people working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at the Internet Crime Complaint Center, which is located in Clarksburg, West Virginia. And then you can follow up with me. I'm going to pick up the phone, call our recovery asset team, and they've been really good about getting money back, even from places like Hong Kong. Maybe not Russia so much, maybe not mainland China, but like Hong Kong, most of the places where you think that we have good relations with the banking industry, we have been really successful.
And Crane, on a related note, speak to what happens when I click that button and I send the money to the wrong person. What does that chain of events look like from a hacker's perspective?
So it's really interesting. So one of the things that I've done over the past really 5 years is, engaging with a bunch of these BEC actors to better understand what happens after an attack is successful. And what's really interesting is sort of the big components of BEC attacks and other types of scams are the money mules, right? So the money mules are going to be the ones that are going to be receiving the fraudulent funds that eventually get back to the main scammers. And those networks are very pervasive. And I think one of the things that most people don't understand are the people who actually receive the initial deposits from something like business email compromise. They're actually generally going to be other victims of other types of scams themselves, whether it's romance scams or unemployment scams or job scams or things like that. Usually the first hop that a lot of that money goes to is to another victim's account. And then it goes to another person and then another person and then finally out of the country in one of dozens of different types of ways. But the sort of the networks of moving money that these scammers have developed over the years are very intricate and very expansive. One of the questions that I get a lot is, what is law enforcement doing to prevent these types of attacks, because they just keep getting worse and worse. And I think one of the responses I always have is law enforcement, both domestically and internationally, and in places like Nigeria, are doing the best job that they can. The problem is that if we're relying on arresting all of the bad guys, then we're never going to solve this problem, because there are way, way, way too many of them. The FBI or the EFCC in Nigeria could arrest, hundreds of scammers tomorrow, and you're not going to make any dent in the overall BEC ecosystem that you see out there. But by working with financial institutions, by working with other parts of the BEC supply chain, that's where we can really actually make a notable difference. And, I've been working with banks for years, trying to minimize the effective lifespan of those accounts. And when you start impacting the money and the financial supply chain, that's where you might be able to make a difference in the long run. But then, of course, then it's also getting people to prevent actually falling for these to begin with. And I think that's a completely different challenge.
One of the trends we observed as a vendor in this space in the last couple of years was when the government started cracking down heavily on ransomware attacks to the point of classifying it like a terrorist attack, hackers started moving away to easier ways to steal money. And that directly correlated to the BEC revenues lost going up, and also to the vendor fraud piece. So sticking to vendor fraud or supply chain fraud, as it's called, sticking to that for a minute, are you seeing that more in terms of complaints locally as well?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is rampant, right? So year on year, I think the good news is we're seeing more. I don't know if it's good or bad news. We're seeing more complaints. I think we're getting the word out more. But as you mentioned, there are more scammers out there, and not for nothing, some of them reside in sanctioned countries, right? So any way they can get cash is good for them. And you may be surprised, there's a uniformed North Korean soldier or an Iranian government contractor or, Russian hackers for hire. All of these people are in the space, and they're all looking to make a quick buck. And then sanctions are just making it harder for them to make money. So, I do want to give props to Department of Treasury as well. They're not represented here, but I think we saw ransomware payments went down 40% last year, right, by some estimates. And I would like to think it's because Treasury OFAC is, hey, these are sanctioned countries, do not pay ransoms into these countries. So that has been helpful. But as you mentioned, when you're squeezing the balloon in one part, it makes the other part squirt out.
And I think what's also really interesting about ransomware specifically is that when you look at ransomware as an ecosystem, it is highly centralized. Over the past 2 years, you look at the actual groups that are responsible for a majority of the ransomware attacks, and it's very, very small, right? So when CISA went under, when they disappeared at the end of 2021, and Conti disappeared at the beginning of last year, they represented about a third to 40% of all of the ransomware attacks that were happening. And what's interesting is because it's so centralized, if law enforcement or takes down one of these groups or puts them out of play, or if their infrastructure gets taken down, then you actually see a noticeable difference in what's going on because there's so few of these actors and groups out there that are responsible for all the attacks, which is very different than something like business email compromise, which is on the exact opposite side of the scale, which is very decentralized, where you really don't have a head of the snake to cut off. You're just trying to figure out, how to prevent those attacks from happening in the first place.
Rick, from a CISA perspective, now kind of touching upon the ChatGPT piece a little bit, are you starting to hear people wanting to learn more from the CISA on what your recommendations are? Is that more part of your agenda going forward?
Well, a lot of folks at organizations aren't that mature. As we're doing these assessments and going across, they're still worried about people clicking on a link, right? And I mean, as that whole environment of threat is evolving, right, with the deep fakes piece and all that, as ChatGPT is getting utilized, that's really a more distant thought, sadly, for a lot of organizations that we're seeing. They're just not that mature and a capability maturity model level, running maybe on an average at a 2, possibly a 3. So we're just not seeing that level yet of understanding and awareness. Is the risk real? The threat? Yeah, most definitely that threat is real. But they're still, you got a crawl, walk, run scenario. They're still at the moving from crawl to walk. And that's a sad part because that creates more work for these guys, right? To where we're more on the identify and protect side of it, right? They, as we try to help them to understand and evolve and develop processes and policies and then processes, right? That just makes more work for these guys on the response end of it.
And Elvis, are you seeing more ChatGPT deepfake related complaints coming in?
So it's still a smattering. So like as Crane mentioned, and I'm sure Rick and I can both attest, is like the social engineering works now, right? Like it already works, even if the English is a little janky, right? So, but like ChatGPT is going to make the grammar better, but man, it's already working. I have seen some companies, I want to say just like a half dozen in the last month and a half or so, have come to me and says, hey, Elvis, like we've been the target of a phishing campaign. This is like a cut above, the grammar looks better. It actually kind of sounds like our CEO is reaching out to them, either through a smishing attack or through a phishing attack. So, and you can't really tell, but they think it's, like either ChatGPT or some AGI generated type of stuff. But man, like that's still like a fraction of a percent. Whereas like the lion's share is just regular social engineering email.
Crane.
Well, even sort of aside from that, outside of ChatGPT, this is why vendor email compromise has become such a big problem over the past 3 to 4 years, is because you're not just sort of using those pure social engineering tactics that we've seen with traditional BEC attacks, but now you have this hybrid approach where you have attackers that are using context and information that they've actually retrieved from a compromised mailbox and using that to make much more realistic looking emails that are targeting, customers of vendors and suppliers. And that's where, I think where a lot of the sort of more sophisticated social engineering has come from over the past couple of years. And there was no AI that was needed to sort of help out with that. I think what we're tackling right now is, there are all of these what's possible. I think that what AI is going to be used for more practically and more robustly by cybercriminals is probably something that we haven't even thought of yet. Because it's always a cat and mouse game. They're always adapting their tactics. This is what they do for a living, and so they're very motivated to figure out new ways to be more successful and more efficient. I think the efficiency perspective is probably, as what was talked about in the panel before, is a big part of what's going to be helpful. But social engineering has already gotten much more sophisticated, and it's just going to get worse.
On that topic, one more question around NCFTA and other organizations that are all working with the agencies in solving for this, right? Can we speak to the banking and finance side of it in terms of how is the FBI getting help in shutting some of these things down?
Yeah, so for those of you who are not familiar, NCFTA is the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance. So it's headquartered in Pittsburgh. FBI Pittsburgh works closely with it. We have an FBI headquarters entity as well that works there. But it's a nonprofit organization. It's an information sharing organization, an ISAC. It's pay to play, right? But it's not. It's a 501c where I think really around the time of like maybe the Iranian DDoS attacks, like it was really proving its worth. All of these organizations, retail organizations, financial institutions, lots of different kinds of companies sharing threat intelligence and near real time, right? And I would say like FS-ISAC is also another good one, but NCFTA is the one that the FBI partners with the most closely.
And Crane, you've worked with the FS-ISAC and
yeah, I mean, it's fantastic as far as a central place to sort of report data. You know, since I had left the bureau, all of the places that I'd always been looking for is like, where do we share information? And I'd been to tried a number of different places, but NCFTA was the one that we landed on to be like, this is a great sort of central repository. Not only is law enforcement, both domestically and internationally represented there, but also all of the big financial institutions there as well. So, and they all actively share information with each other, which is fantastic.
One related question around sticking to the finance side of the house is cyber insurance. From a regulatory side of the equation, have you seen working with cyber insurance providers as a way to enforce certain security hygiene in organizations? Is the CISA looking at that, even educating people about the obvious that cyber insurance premiums are going up, so you need better protection in place?
We are, there's quite a few that we're working with, but just helping them to understand. A lot of them in a particular ISAC may not understand what should our policy even be, right? There's no policy that exists. And so they're having to develop that policy and then getting honesty and all the right people in on that conversation. Is a risk manager involved? Is legal involved? You know, is the financial office involved? Because whoever's filling that form out, they're saying, oh yeah, I'm answering this and taking responsibility for it when they may not have the knowledge to really answer that question for that organization or that group. And so it's just kind of informing them about, hey, here's what exists that we can tell you about already, right down to we've done assessments within this particular sector, and here's some of the trends that we're seeing, not naming any names because we can't do that. We protect critical infrastructure information. But we can show, hey, here's what the trends are in the areas where you're weak and strong collectively, and then compare that against their own results as they get assessed.
And as part of that work, I know with the president's new cybersecurity policy, is there some focus on NIST enforcing more checkboxes around business email compromise and other email-related scams? You're
saying NIST enforcing or informing?
Informing.
Okay. Yeah, and that's the toughest thing because CISA is not, we're not a strong arm. We're an advisor. You know, somebody else, another agency that I know of, does that come in and check hard, you know, but we just go in and do the assessment with them and inform them about what, for instance, for AI, just back in January, NIST came out with the RMF AI for AI, you know, and put that out there. How long it will take those organizations to implement that and follow that? When are they really following the NIST standards that are out there already? You know, when I was just saying that the capability maturity model level is a 2 at best on average, you know, AI is yet another step, you know, and but it comes back down to understanding what are those risks for the organization and what kind of communications flowing back and forth between the folks doing the work out in the field and those up at headquarters level making the executive decisions. And that's the biggest piece that those assessments do is help to inform. And we do that against those NIST standards.
And is there a CISA newsletter or a bulletin that I can subscribe to? Where do I go to find that information?
Certainly. If you just go to CISA.gov, we have a Shields Up page, and it has a list of all of our free services. They're available for you there. So it's CISA.gov/Shields Up, and everything that we do is on that page.
How about the FBI's alerts?
So all of the FBI's alerts are also on the CISA website, but they're also on IC3.gov. And then if you are not already InfraGard members, so that's another nonprofit organization that the FBI partners with to share threat intelligence. So whenever FBI and CISA get together to do cyber threat advisories, InfraGard members are among the first to get that. So if you just Google InfraGard, INFRAGARD, there's a local chapter wherever you're from.
And Crane, in addition to these, what else can I go read up on to learn more about the latest kinds of attacks and what I should focus on?
Yeah, to be honest, from the threat intelligence perspective, the place I always go is like I have a Twitter TweetDeck thing all about VEC and ransomware and other types of attacks because in today, Twitter is its own little thing right now, but it used to be a very sort of great place where you get to see really up-to-date thoughts about and sort of the good stream of articles that came out on different topics. Other than that, it's really difficult to actually find a really good centralized place for non-public information, right? So a lot of vendors have their own blogs and, research articles and things like that. But it's really difficult to sort of find a place that, especially that's touching on non-technically sophisticated attacks, right? So business email compromise, other types of sort of social engineering scams. To be frank, there's not that much out there to sort of that could be relied on. Everyone likes to talk about malware and ransomware all the time, but apparently, BEC is not sexy enough for some people to want to write on all the time. So,
a follow-up question to you on that. So if I work at a company, I'm in the security organization. What are some of the top 5 things I should worry about in terms of my security hygiene from an email security perspective?
For me, it's the understanding that the technical stuff, while it scares a lot of people, is almost always preceded by something non-technical, right? So the basic credential phishing attacks, right? Those would be one of the number one sort of threats that I would want to focus on because that not only provides sort of the next step into other more technically sophisticated attacks, but also things like vendor email compromise and other types of ends, especially now that everyone's getting into a cloud infrastructure. Credential phishing gets you the keys to the kingdom. That's why we saw 5-6 years ago the big pivot in the credential phishing world away from banks as the primary target of credential phishing attacks to things like Microsoft and Google as the primary targets because it's sort of the keys to the kingdom. So credential phishing to me is sort of number one. Number two, business email compromise is definitely important from a purely financial perspective, but also a trust perspective. And then making sure, as far as your infrastructure is concerned, making sure that everything is patched up to date. CISA has some great resources for being able to be up to date on all of the most recent vulnerabilities that have been made public. And so that's what I would say as far as from a priority perspective.
Any questions from the audience? Go ahead.
So I have one question. You guys are creating these reports and they're coming out with the IC3 What are the demographics for people that are mostly being caught in that phishing?
Just to repeat the question, demographics of people that are attacked the most.
So that's easy. We actually break it down in the IC3.gov report. Highly recommend you look at it. It's seniors. Seniors are the most targeted age group. And that makes sense, right? Because they're the ones with pensions. They're the ones who have 401ks, the most savings. But yeah, it's it's 55 and over, the most heavily targeted. And then if you want to break it out by state, it's California by an order of magnitude over New York and Texas. I think California is equal to New York and Texas combined in terms of the number of complaints that we've gotten.
The follow-up question to that is, from the CISA side, why are there not more targeted campaigns to those demographics to go in and you have it on mainstream media or the TV channels to watch, or the radios they want to listen to? Why is there no more? You said a lot of your services are for free. So why is there not more emphasis on that awareness for that specific demographics?
So to provide a little bit of context, I think one thing to keep in mind with the IC3 report is that that includes the entire ecosystem of cyber attacks and not just enterprise-focused attacks. So a lot of the senior victims that are out there are the targets of individually targeted attacks or consumer-focused attacks.
Enterprises are doing a lot more on awareness, putting in products like Proofpoint, Armorblox to protect their own users from those attacks, but it's the regular user that's sitting at home on their own computer or their smartphone, those are the ones that, in my personal opinion, are more vulnerable. And they are the ones that we're not focusing on making them aware.
And that's also one of the reasons that you're starting to see an increase in SMS-based enterprise-focused phishing attacks. It's just for that exact same reason, because some attackers have started pivoting away from enterprise infrastructure as their focus and towards personally owned infrastructure where they can get the exact same results, just they don't have to go through the same lines of defense in order to get to those results.
And that was the question.
So does CISA work with individuals too? Like, is there?
So yes, but by way of state, right? So for Nevada, where I'm from, for instance, I work with the Division of Emergency Management. They have a sector that focuses on special groups, seniors, people with disabilities, et cetera, right? With learning disabilities, to help them so that they understand the risk, right? And then what to do in the event of an attempt like that, how to thwart it, how to report it, et cetera, right? So we work with those divisions of emergency management at the state level. But we're very much dual mission because there's 16 critical sectors, right? It's not just government. Government is one of 16. But yeah.
Why are we not leveraging media channels to reach the population?
Let's maybe continue this right after this panel. I think, Erin, do we have time for one more question? Okay, any last question from anyone?
Good question, though. Thank you.
Anyone else? If not, thank you all. Very informative panel. And they will be around at least for a little bit. Hopefully people want to have more discussions. Thank you so much for being part of our Context Conference.